How many times have you walked away from a tough conversation thinking, boy, that could have gone better if only I had fill in the blank? Too many times to count, right? Because difficult conversations are always difficult. They're difficult and challenging. So, what do? We avoid them. And in retrospect, it's clear to see what we could have done differently or better. But when we're in the heat of the moment, we are blinded by what? Our emotions. We're caught up in our feelings. And if we're not careful, we'll get stuck and we will tear down relationships rather than build them up. And so, what are we to do? What is a girl in her 50s supposed to do, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about in today's conversation. We're talking about how to approach difficult conversations with compassion. That's right, it's possible and it's more than important because here's the thing, relationships make the world go round, right? Everything is about relationships. If we want to have healthy, loving relationships, then we're got to be willing to have those difficult conversations, whether they're intimate relationships with our spouse or our partner, or with our children, or with our parents, or with our siblings, our cousins, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, right? Because they're everywhere. Wherever there are people, we have relationships. And if we're not careful, if we don't nurture them, and cultivate a loving relationship, we can get stuck in some messed up, jacked up, dysfunctional relationships. And so difficult conversations are natural. But most of us, if you're anything like me, I avoid them. Let's be honest. And maybe you do too. You avoid the difficult conversations, you run from them, you hide from them. And what happens is that because we're not willing to address whatever the issue becomes bigger, bigger, bigger. When if we had addressed it, we could have brought it down here, got some control over it, and been able to continue moving forward. So it's really important for us to learn how to approach difficult conversations with compassion, love, and patience. And you may be sitting there saying, it's not possible. You don't know the people that I hang around with. You don't know my family. It's not possible for me to approach it with love, patience, and compassion. And I'm going to tell you, you're right. I don't know you. But what I am going to share with you is what I have learned in dealing with difficult conversations. And maybe there's something that you can walk away from or walk away with and be able to apply it to your situation. I'm going to say if you haven't tried it, try it because you never know, it may get better. Only if you're willing to approach it differently than having to go off or having to tell somebody what they need to be told so that you put them in their place, right? Because that was me. And I have learned as I have gotten older, that don't work. It doesn't. And this is why I say it's important to learn how to do this in your 50s because how you responded in your 20s and your 30s is not really how you respond in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. Why? Because you've learned what doesn't work. You've changed, you've matured, hopefully, right? And so you're willing to take on some things that you may not have been willing to address back when you were younger. And so I want to share with you what I have learned. And there are four steps when you are approaching a conversation with compassion and a difficult conversation with compassion. The first step is to listen actively. You know, people want to be heard. People want to know that you're paying attention to them. And sometimes these difficult conversations can go a lot smoother if we approach it by listening and not by talking. And I had to learn that. Like, I felt like I know everything. Yeah, I had to outgrow that. And so I'm doing all the talking, and I'm not listening to what the other person is saying. I'm not trying to understand their perspective. And if I was listening, it was just an opportunity for me to jump in. Is anybody resonating with this? If so, put it down in the chat because I want to know that I'm not alone. But listening actively, it just changes the entire dynamic of the conversation because now the person feels like you care. Now the person feels like you see them and you're acknowledging how they feel. So that's the first step to approaching difficult conversations with compassion. Listen actively. And the second step is so important, and that is use I statements. Instead of approaching the conversation where you did this and you made me feel this way and you never do this, you start to approach it from I feel. I feel that you are not paying, I feel that you're not spending enough time with me, or I feel that you are ignoring me, or I feel that when this happens, this is how I feel. However, you want to say it, but you start it with I statements because it takes the pressure off of the person and you're not blaming them and pointing the finger. You're actually speaking from a space of, this is how I feel when this happens. And it really does show that we're taking ownership for our feelings versus putting it on the other person like they are responsible for our happiness, which they are not. We are 1,000% responsible for our happiness, not the other person. And so when we have difficult conversations, we're taking ownership of our feelings, our part in the situation versus projecting or blaming the other person. And it really does let people put down their guards and it helps softens your heart to say that I'm expressing how I feel. I am making myself vulnerable, which is always a risk. But that's the risk that we always take when we go into relationship with another person. We have to be vulnerable. And the third letter is S, stay calm. It's just as important as listen actively and just as important as using I statements. It is to stay calm so things don't escalate, right? Stay calm so you're not getting clouded by your emotions that may be negative. You may be feeling anger, you may be feeling resentment, or you're feeling that you've been disrespected or you've been insulted. And those emotions that come with that are negative, and it's going to escalate if you do not stay calm. So stay calm and in control of the conversation. Remember to listen to what the other person is saying and use I statements so that you're not pointing the finger at them. And that will help you to stay level headed and stay calm. In fact, going into the conversation with a calm tone and maybe actually having the conversation when it's not in the heat of the moment. When you've had some time and some space from the initial insult to the time of the difficult conversation, and now you're coming into the conversation with a clear mind, and that will help you to stay focused. And the last letter is T. Try to find common ground. You may not agree, and that is okay. But did you hear the person and were you heard? Did you respect the person and did you feel respected? And that's great. Then check that off. Yes, that's done. Then try to find that common ground where you two can agree. And maybe you agree to disagree, but still be able to move forward in the relationship. And when you find that common ground, you're now building and strengthening that relationship rather than tearing it down. And so those are the four steps. Listen actively, use I statements, stay calm, and try to find common ground. Now, one easy way to remember this is by using the acronym LIST. List. Go through this list whenever you have to have a difficult conversation. And ideally, go through this list before you start engaging in the conversation. It's always good to have a strategy to build relationships because if you don't, you'll get stuck with a lot of broken, dysfunctional relationships. Who can relate to that? I can. And now I've learned as I've gotten older and I've become wiser and mature that I have the power to change the quality of my relationships. And so do you. So I pray that this blessed you, helped you. If it, like the video, put it down in the comments what you need to do or what steps you take in order to address these difficult conversations. And if anything I shared was of value, let me hear that. It's encouraging to continue making videos. And if you like it, subscribe to the station so you'll get more content and then share it with somebody because we all want loving, healthy relationships. We don't want to get stuck in dysfunctional relationships when we do have the power to get unstuck and become unstoppable and create loving, healthy, thriving relationships for all of us involved. All right, my friend, I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thank you for watching to the end and be blessed.